It's a very common act to create a second or a third check for employees. That happens all the time in the payroll business. So let's talk very briefly about how in Platinum Pay we can make that happen. We're going to start under the assumption that we have a check for an existing employee created. And as you could probably tell, I'm in the payroll details section. Okay, when we click on payroll details from the start screen or the total screen, we're presented with what we call the pay entry grid, where we see pays, deductions, and memos. That's where I am currently. I'm going to double click on the employee box to prompt a list of all active employees, and I'm looking for my friend Joseph King. I'm going to double click on Joseph King and then press enter on my keyboard. Okay? When we do that, if there's already a check created for Mr. King, we're going to be staring that right in the face. Okay? Up here we can see this is check 1 of 1. Okay, which is what we expect. And here's the results of the inside of that check. To create a second check for Mr. King, okay, we're going to click on this button, new check, same employee. When we click on that, the check image with the green plus, we're presented with a blank pay entry grid, and the system begins to create the check just like it did the original one. It's going to always default to code 0, regular pay, and if it's an hourly person, you're going to put that in there. A couple things to be aware of when you're making a second check. You might not want deductions to come out. If you don't have those scheduled to come out only on the first check, which we can programmatically do in another video, you'll see that working with employee deductions. Not a big deal. You can simply go to the flat OR, stands for flat override, hit 0, and that zeros or blanks out any deductions. So let's say our intent was to pay a bonus. So maybe we'll change the type of pay code. And you can either click with your mouse or you can tab with your keyboard over. Since this is a fixed dollar amount, I'm going to type that in. And if I'd like to see the results of my work, I can either hit the F11 key or I can hit normal check button. That's going to calculate the check and going to ask me, hey, are these okay? And would you like to save that? And I am going to say yes. Okay. Now, I save the check and I'm back up in normal mode, prepared to make or adjust another normal check. That's what that means. Now let's see the results of our work. Let's double click once again and look for Joseph King. Double clicking again prompts the number. Now hit enter on your keyboard to pull. Now you're going to notice you're 1 of 2. Okay, so there's 2 checks in the database for King, and you can use these handy VCR buttons to flip-flop between the checks. So again, you can go back and forth. You can edit them. You can F11 or hit the normal check button to calculate and save that check, and on and on. One final note, and this is a little bit of a side note, but it's important because it happens every time a second check is on there. We've got to coach clients that the IRS is emphatic that if you're taxing them on the same frequency, for instance, if I'm a weekly payer, if I hand out, it doesn't matter if I hand out 13 checks. If they all have the same check date and they're being considered on the same tax frequency, I absolutely have to add them together. Even if it's 13 individual checks, I have to add them together, and those total gross wages will dictate what tax bracket that check is calced at. Okay? What's that mean in our system? That means that when I put Joseph's second check in there, the $1,200 from the first check and the $100 from the second, that $1,300 is lumped together and aggregated, and that's what is applied against the tax table. You know, $100 will probably not make a big difference, but that was a $5,000 bonus check. You're going to be kicking him up into a totally different tax bracket that he's never been before. Okay, so our options there are, as the user, you can either decide to manipulate the federal withholding. Okay, at your discretion. Again, our software is going to keep you in compliance by putting in a federal amount in the override column, or what I typically recommend on a second check, and we'll explore this in a little bit more options in another neighboring video, but up in the info options, you can change the frequency. So maybe that was a quarterly bonus. By doing that, you untether those 2 checks. One's on a weekly frequency, the other's a quarterly, and they will tax appropriately individually. So just keep that in mind when you're making a check. Again, back to check entry slides you back to the main screen. That making second checks is not a big deal, but please do remember the ramifications of adding those together for tax purposes.